Hey, everybody. We got so into our interview that I forgot to mention before you get into this, make sure you hit the subscribe button or like button. It sure would help us, and I think it'll help you in terms of obtaining greater content and really helping you as you navigate the intersection of leadership and culture. All right, let's get into the interview together. Hey, everybody. My name's Derek. I'm the CEO and founder of Wenwyn. I'm here with our Director of Organizational Development, David. And this is really our second roundtable.
Mhm.
And David is the genius kind of behind setting all of this stuff up. And he
That's
does
very
such a
generous.
great job really developing our organization and kind of taking us to new places, which I so appreciate. And I thought we would take a roundtable, and I don't know it's called a roundtable. I think this is going to be more like an interview, but I thought we would just talk about leadership. And you're a next gen leader. I feel really blessed that I've got three sons and they're leaders and exceptional, extraordinary leaders at that. But you have led teams overseas. You have been interviewed on radio stations. You have led in ministries. You have led in discipleship efforts. You have led in outreach efforts. You've just led in so many ways. And you're really a next gen leader. And one of the things that we're trying to do at Wenwyn is help leaders develop. And so I thought maybe we would talk about the perspective, insight, and tools that you see, that you use for your leadership. And let me just preface this by saying at Wenwyn, we really do think that what makes leaders extraordinary are the perspectives, that they see the macro picture. And that's why leadership is necessary. You can say leadership is about influence, but everybody influences everybody. So, what does a leader actually bring? Well, they bring a macro perspective. They bring insight. They see through the temper tantrum to something else, to the trajectory, to what's going on underneath. And that's different than a macro perspective. A toddler will one day be a teenager, and then they bring certain tools and skill sets to leadership. Leadership is involves a certain set of skills in order to manage other people. So I thought we'd talk about that from your perspective. I might offer a few thoughts in here as well, and that would be this interview, this podcast. Does that sound good to you?
Sounds great, man. I appreciate being here. I love doing these roundtables with you. I think I personally know that I grow every time we have these kind of discussions. I really enjoy the depth that we get into on a lot of the topics that we have when we're in the car together or otherwise. And so I think this is a great extension, and we love getting to bring you all on board into this conversation.
But we should also talk about the knees in the room. We're
Yes,
both wearing shorts, and I've got my road ID kind of
go for it,
hoodie,
right?
and yeah, it's road biking season.
Yes,
I love
indeed it is.
cycling, and so
The Tour de
we're
France will be starting soon.
it will be starting
Oh,
soon, and I watch every year, as
yeah.
you know. And so, anyway, let's talk about leadership. We're going to kind of categorize this and just kind of deal with each separately. Let's talk about perspectives.
Okay.
Um, what is it that you have found as a next gen leader that is helpful in developing, fostering a perspective and leading others to really buy into the vision or to have a view, a macro view of what it is that you're trying to accomplish?
That's a great question. So, as far as the shift in perspectives, being a next gen leader, I kind of see where we're bridging from, and a lot of the struggle that I've seen is moving away more from a top down mentality of leadership. This the traditional hierarchy, whether you're in a business or you're in a church, of let me direct, go do based on what I'm telling you to do versus collaborative leadership. And that's not to sound like it's all we're moving towards like a communitarian branch of leadership, but it is to say that the next gen leaders, the most success that I have seen is when there is among leadership a cohesive sense of partnership and buy-in. If you have someone who's gifted in a particular department or for a particular outreach, they're going to succeed the most if they feel that the leadership backs their vision, that we're united to a greater vision, but they are all in together moving forward. It's not so much, well, we've always done it this way, so go do that. And yeah, I like your passion. Take that passion, but apply it to what I want versus apply it to how God's equipped you and where we are going together as an organization. That takes a lot of communication. It takes also a lot of humility, I think, a lack of hubris and a sense of we in the team that a lot of to relate this, for example, to Christian leadership, a lot of churches are feeling some of the growing pains moving towards. And I say that tentatively because I see also a lot of churches who've already made that jump and are doing so brilliantly. But not all places are equally influential, as we say, and so there are some places that are still struggling with that. I feel that a bit more acutely geographically, being where I'm located. I live more in the southern part of the United States, and so change can move slower down there than say in northern cities or in major urban centers. So a lot of the leaders there are feeling that particular sting. That being said, though, the perspective of those leaders when it comes to grabbing the imaginations of the people they're trying to reach out to, they really, I love the fact that, and this might be one of the few times you hear me advocate in a sense for the postmodern mindset. One of the things when we were in Europe that was so key in identifying early on for success in ministry is people aren't going to listen to you unless they know that you care about them first. You don't earn the right to speak unless people sense that you're invested in them and truly invested. They're not a project. You're not just focused on them as a fad or what have you. It's not self-centered. It's about them and who they are genuinely.
Can you talk a little bit more about the? I totally understand what you're saying, and there is a command and control style of leader who says, "Look, I say that's my position.
Of
Go
course,
do."
yeah,
That's always been true.
yeah,
It's also always been true that a leader still has to get others to move toward what it is that
exactly.
they're there for. So, if you think even in terms of maybe the most command and
Hmm.
control, leadership in war, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
talk wartime leadership.
yeah.
Um, it should very much be here's the marching orders, go do. But
Right,
even there, we see that the best leaders, in some ways, are collaborative.
exactly.
Talk to me about the difference between collaboration
Hmm.
and, as you termed it, the communal.
Right,
And what I mean by that is a lot of leadership today, it seems like it's done in teams,
right,
as if the team is going to magically
right.
decide things. But there is such a thing as pooled ignorance.
Yeah.
And that team also needs to be led.
Exactly. So I love the distinction you make there with the wartime analogy. So your environment does shape your leadership to a degree. But you're right, the best leaders understand that they're not wholly influenced by their environments. In a wartime situation, you absolutely need to be able to rely on a chain of command to get things done because you're moving with mission and you have to, otherwise there's dramatic consequences for failure. The church, broadly speaking, doesn't have that same mentality. And sometimes I wonder if we would benefit from taking that kind of mission more seriously. But I don't know that
Wait, stop. What mission?
the mission of the church for evangelizing,
So
right?
so having the mission drive
Yeah, the
the
mission drive
efforts,
with that kind of severity. Sorry,
as opposed to what?
well, as opposed to maybe more of a lackadaisical. Well, we're here and we're just gonna be a
Got it.
nice, warm, welcoming
Okay.
center. So I like the wartime analogy, and I'm talking
Because we are in a spiritual war.
exactly.
Got it.
I
Okay.
wonder if we could benefit.
I'm trying to track with where you're
I
going
know
here.
I'm
That's
kind of taking
okay.
a long way there, but I'll get there.
Okay.
As far as the communitarian view of leadership versus the kind of command hierarchy there is a balance. The risk and what we feel, I think, a lot in growing pains in churches, etc., for leaning too hard into the team dynamic, as you said, pulled ignorance, not enough gets done. Everyone kind of feels like, well, where are we going? I'm just going to advocate for my specialty, and we're just going to kind of fall into conflict and not a lot's going to get done. So there has to be someone there willing to guard the vision. There's actually a great book. I forget who wrote it, but it's called Be Mean About the Vision. If you're not united behind a cogent, concise vision for what your objective is, kind of going back to the wartime analogy there, you're going to fall apart. You're going to
Yeah.
fall into infighting and ego is going to bloom. That is detrimental to leadership. The balance there comes from the main leader, if you in a traditional hierarchy, the lead pastor, whoever's in charge of guarding that vision.
Well, I know you're talking about in terms of church, but I just want to pause real
Yeah,
quick
yeah,
because this is also important for a business owner or a
absolutely.
nonprofit owner. So often in thinking, okay, we want to engage millennials or Gen Zers, everyone's going to have an equal voice. And frankly, not only does a lot of the literature say it, but a lot of business experience today says that everyone expects to have an equal voice, that
Right.
the person coming in that's been there a month thinks that they have an equal voice with the CEO who's been there for
Yeah,
20
yeah,
years. Um, and the challenge is thinking, well, in order to lead those generations, they have to have equal
yeah.
voice. But that maybe isn't accurate. It's actually that they have a
They
voice.
have a voice
And that's
that
different than having an equal voice.
exactly they have a voice and that they feel that their contributions are valuable to the mission. Now, That's going to require deafness on part of the leader in how they translate that.
Deftness,
Deftness, yes,
not
sorry.
deafness.
Not deafness, no, deftness.
No, and no, and by the way, it's I know that's kind of an odd slip, but the truth is, a lot of CEOs or leaders or church leaders, in the name of giving a voice, they're actually they are deaf to
Yeah,
that voice. So what you're talking about is valuable contribution, letting them know that
exactly.
they're actually their contribution means something. That
Yes.
good ideas can come from anywhere.
Exactly. And that is something I've seen really be lacking in secular work as well as in the church, broadly speaking.
Yeah,
The new employee, they need to feel that what they do matters, that they have a voice, and that goes beyond an appreciative pizza party, right? It comes down to actual relationship with people who are moving the company forward. Now, the CEO of a Fortune 500 can't be everywhere to everyone,
right.
but systems can be put in place where people have a voice that is heard. And I think we're seeing that transition happen slowly in some areas, but it is happening more and more.
Well, and in the organizational structure, a good departmental supervisor, for instance, would kind of use
Yeah,
that same approach. What starts at the top should be modeled throughout the company
exactly.
for integrity and also throughout the church. It's funny, we actually didn't coordinate this at all. This
Uh-huh.
is being captured kind of live as we're going through it, and I'm hearing what you're saying for the very first time. Um, in preparing for this, as I thought about the idea of perspective, and I thought about what mistakes do some leaders make. Um, it's interesting for me to listen and go, oh, that actually resonates with what I wrote. Because what I wrote down was, it's not about their thing, but about the thing.
Exactly.
And so often a leader will come in and they will, in their perspective of it, the macro, they'll lead by based on what they're passionate about, but not based on what the actual purpose of the department is
Exactly.
or the purpose of the organization is. And so what happens is they weave their passion,
Hmm.
it kind of bleeds through into everything else that that organization is doing, but not always in the best interest of the organization. And I can think of some classic examples in churches. I pastored while I was in seminary, and one of the things you just notice with seminary students is they're learning and they're so passionate about what they're learning. If they're in ministry, they suddenly believe that everybody in their ministry has to be learning what they're learning
Right.
as a seminarian. And so, like, now if you only knew what the Greek said, I
Right.
was like, so the challenge is that some bend that way more than others, and it doesn't become any more about what is advancing the mission. It doesn't even become about what is being communicated with the people that you're leading. Instead, it becomes about your passion. And that boils down to a great word that you used earlier, which is hubris. The idea or the notion that everyone should um, be as passionate about as the things as what that I'm passionate
Right.
about. And instead of, well, let's all get passionate about what this department exists for, what this company
Right.
exists for, or what we're trying to do. So I think it's interesting to hear how these have really dovetailed. Let's talk about insights. I
Okay.
just want to shift the conversation a little bit. So leadership in the macro, here's where we're going. I want to get everybody on board with it. One of the things that you said is in the past, maybe you can command and control. Hey, everybody, drop what you're doing. We're marching this way. But if you're going to lead new gens,
Mhm.
it's important to understand that they feel as if they have a valuable voice. They know that not all their contributions are going to be meaningful
Right.
contributions, but they do need to know that those contributions are at least heard and welcomed. And
Right.
you can use some empathetic listening skills
Yeah.
in order to reflect that and appreciate that. It doesn't mean they have all the power. It also doesn't mean that you have to have pooled ignorance by teams. Let's all just vote on what we want to do.
Yeah.
Um, there's mixed materials that are out there. Some say if you let the crowd decide, it's as accurate as letting an individual decide. I just disagree
Yeah. I would say pretty
with some of that. But
strongly. I see where they're coming from, though.
yeah, no, I understand that sometimes you get better ideas and more
Yeah.
ideas
There is
from
there is
many
a
sources.
utility for those
Absolutely.
approaches.
But let's talk about insight.
Yeah.
So insight is about seeing beyond.
Hmm.
Um, so when you've led teams overseas, when you've spoke with people here domestically, sometimes there'll be a reaction, there'll be something that's happening in the moment that is less about that moment than it is about something deeper.
Yeah.
How do you, as a team leader, respond to the sound and fury
Hmm.
that can happen in a moment that you have to deal with?
Yeah.
right? You can't like let it fester. You can't let it hijack what's happening in your department or organization or mission trip or church or whatever it is. Um, how do you insightfully see through that, and then how do you address it?
That's a great question. So,
I know that's why I asked it.
I know,
That's
right?
pretty
That's
good,
good. We're pretty good at asking
right?
questions here at Wenwyn. I like it. That's a, no, it's great because it's so contextual at times, but the broad strokes of navigating those situations have never really changed. I think you wrote a song or you sung a song. I have this memory of one of your albums, like back as a kid, where you sang a song like "The main thing is to keep the main thing the main
That's
thing."
Scott
That's
Crepane.
Scott.
He
Okay,
deserves the credit for
you
that.
sung that in the car then,
I
so I
love
thought it
that
was your
song.
song.
Right.
Great song, but that's a great message too. Like so,
The
in those
main thing
moments,
is to keep the
the
main
main
thing
thing,
the
the
main
main
thing.
thing, exactly. And so when I've led teams overseas and we've had conflicts, whether it be in the team itself, between the team and locals that they're trying to engage with, um, those emotions. First of all, on the person reacting in that situation,
The
they have
leader.
no. I'm talking about the person who's
Oh, on the
caught
team.
up
Right.
in the moment there with
Got it.
those emotions. Their biggest need there is to feel like they're being heard, to feel like what they're responding to is important. The leader has to understand how to disengage. And I mean disengage not like I'm stepping out or let this play out, but like disengage the emotionality they might be feeling to
It's
take a
not
step
take it
down,
personally.
not take it personally. Um, Again, context will shape some of that. So if someone is acting out in a way that's wholly inappropriate to the mission, then yeah, there's some emotion that is warranted there on part of the leader to make sure that that can be addressed and tamped down appropriately. But broadly speaking, if a leader is going to lead well, they have to understand that what that person in that moment needs is to feel heard and have that issue dealt with in the moment. As you said, it's beyond letting it fester, letting it kind of take its own course there. They want resolution, and your team needs resolution. Your mission needs resolution. So for the leader to be able to disengage their emotions enough just to listen, to understand what's going on, and to remember why they're there or what the objective is.
To not feel
Because
threatened
to
by the
not feel
moment as
threatened.
well. Right.
Exactly, right? The most conflict I have ever seen on teams or leading teams has been when a leader has felt personally threatened. They're so invested in their role in the trip and things going according to their plan that any perceived attack on that is a personal attack and they have to respond in kind.
When
That is the wrong way to go.
and that's also where good self-awareness is important,
Exactly.
because Myers-Briggs famously has causes of conflict or perceived
Mhm.
conflict, and different personality types actually interpret feeling threatened
Right.
differently. Some feel as if their values are threatened. Some feel as if their authority is threatened.
Exactly.
Some feel as if their worth is threatened.
Mhm.
So there's all kinds of ways to deal with that.
Kind of
One,
back to insight though, is what
to
we're saying.
insight, right?
Exactly. So the the core of the mission has to be one built on insight. We're living in an era now where we have so much information at our fingertips. I always think back to that Nietzschean line where he talks about the death of God. He talks about how we've wiped away the horizon, and we just no longer know up from down anymore. We're kind of awash in this, in a similar turbulence when it comes to how we perceive information. We have everything in the world at our fingertips, and we can't make heads or tails of what is important and what isn't important. So,
So wait. So stop real quick. So I'm gonna hit pause because you just said something that's really key.
mhm,
That the leader, um, by the way, irrespective of which generation they're in, a part of bringing insight is helping others understand what's important and what's actually happening
exactly,
versus what they think is happening, because those are sometimes two different
yeah,
things. So they may think one thing is happening, but the leader, because they are outside of that person, because they can see through the action, they can actually see through to the course of something else going on and the damage that may be doing to the very person who's throwing the temper tantrum or
exactly,
having the conflict or is the office gossip or
right.
whatever it is.
So the leader has to be attuned to what is the key objective, what is actually going on, and to be able to communicate that well. That requires active listening on their part. It requires an emotional disengagement to a degree, depending on the situation, so that the person who is responding out of that emotion can feel hurt, but also not feel threatened. And I mean that not in the sense that they feel threatened for their person, but they feel that their response isn't threatening the team or the mission as well.
I think the leader also has to have the courage to allow the other person to feel threatened. Here's what I mean by that.
Okay.
One of the things that I wrote down for this is the too many leaders react to the situation rather than the trajectory.
Hmm.
So what if you think about a toddler, throwing a temper tantrum, um, you have to deal with the temper tantrum.
Of course.
Your kid can't scream in the grocery aisle, right?
Right.
Or disrupt the worship service or whatever it is. You have to deal with that.
Hmm.
But you also have to see beyond it that if you don't deal with it,
Hmm.
that sets a pattern that actually says something deeper about demand, about how they get attention to have their own way,
Hmm.
about what works to manipulate others. Now, that's true for adults as well. We're all learning. And so what I've found is that the leader and they so often are reacting
Mm.
to whatever the adult is doing. And look, we're all people. We all have insecurities. We all have flaws. And so, for instance, the someone wants to audition for a worship team. It's more about their need to audition than
Yeah.
it is about their talent.
Yeah.
And so, what happens is, if the leader says, "Well, I don't want to threaten them," they put them on the team, but it can actually damage the overall
Right.
quality of what's happening. Same thing's true in departments, HR departments or
Right.
sales departments or marketing departments. That same idea is true. And so the question is actually what helps them.
Right.
And in that moment, you have choices. You can tell them they're horrible. You can, demean them, or you can place them. You can ignore it.
Right.
They're acting clearly out of a need. Or what you can do is identify the trajectory of
Mm.
it. And you can say, hey, listen, I see what you're going for. Um, I want to help you develop,
Right.
right?
I
And
think.
so instead of you don't have to squash it,
Yeah.
but if you're looking at the trajectory, you can go, here's where you're at in your development,
Yeah.
and here are the steps that you need. I'll give you one more illustration. So I was speaking years ago when I was as a part of a think tank in Richmond with a colleague, and he was describing a previous work situation that he knew about in the government, and there was a politician who'd been around a while. He wielded a lot of power,
Mm.
and he brought in an intern for him. And this intern was high quality, a great worker. He placed him in a position, and within a year, this guy was receiving other offers, like major offers. And he decided that he would take one of these offers. So he goes into this politician's office, and the politician said, um, I'm going to politely reject your resignation because you're actually not ready to do the very thing that I'm trying to get you ready to do.
Mm.
When I'm done with you, that it's not just that one person's going to want you, everyone's going to want you. And I want everyone to want you.
Mm.
I'm not interested in retaining you as much as I am interested in your future.
Mm.
But for you to develop there, you need to stay here
Mm.
for at least another year. There are still things you need to learn. The person made the wise choice and said, okay, I'm going to stay. Clearly, you see something in me
Yeah.
that I am not fully aware of. And sure enough, about a year or two later, everybody wanted this person and they were in a much better position. So the leader sees the trajectory. They don't
Yeah.
just see the moment, but the trajectory.
That
That's insightful.
that is very insightful, and I love how you define that as well. Because when I was saying when I was using the term threaten, I was relating it to the person who was responding that moment, feeling that they had the space to, I wouldn't say necessarily emote, but to express and be heard without it affecting the external environment of the mission, right? And that takes a lot of skill on part of the leader to navigate
Well,
insight. But you're absolutely right too. The threat of consequence, if the trajectory is deviated from, if that person is unwilling to be mindful of their own trajectory and not willing to take the advice, the leadership, the direction, the development of the leader trying to pour into them, that is another element that has to be present as well. The two are held in tension together, and I love how you related that to trajectory over.
no, but I know what you mean when you said remove the emotion. And what you were saying was you're going to have to figure out how to be very genuine
Yeah.
and not in the moment reactive, right? When you say detach yourself from emotion, you're not saying the leader should become a robot.
No, no, far
And
from it.
the other person can sense that. That's not helpful for the
Yeah,
other person. But they need to decide how they're going to be as genuine as they can be.
exactly.
And genuine isn't the same thing as, well, you saw me genuinely fly off the handle.
Yeah, no, that gets
Genuine
abused
is
so
being,
much.
yeah, genuine is being the person you actually intend to be.
Hmm.
And so, and not the other person that comes screaming in the moment.
Can you
You
repeat
know,
that again? Because that deserves to be clipped at some point. Like, what is genuine?
genuine is the being the person you intend to be.
That's great.
And so, and I would say, as a Christ follower, the person God made you to be.
Hmm.
It's interesting in behavior, especially as a believer, you're always having to make choices. And some people, in the name of authenticity, actually make sinful choices, but they justify that by saying they were authentic.
Hmm.
And so I'm mean, but at least I'm authentic.
Yeah.
Well, scripturally, you're to be the person you are in Christ. And so you make decisions according to that. So I think the leader just has to decide, what kind of leader do I want
Yeah.
to be? And in those high tension moments, I agree. They do have to somewhat detach
Mhm.
the reactive sense of self from the responsive sense of self. Here's the good news. You can always remove yourself later and like complain in a car,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Or go talk to someone.
No one's an island,
That's
in
right.
themselves. I get
It's
it.
all God. That
Absolutely.
leading others is frustrating,
Yeah.
and we should just acknowledge that. But it's not. But it can also be a
Mhm.
really genuinely joyful
Yeah.
experience.
I think what you just described too, that's an inherently countercultural perspective on leadership and authenticity. Because I see that play out within Christian circles and non-Christian circles. This idea that authenticity is, well, I'm just not going to make any excuses or apologies for how I behave. I'm just being my authentic self. And I've seen those people criticize people trying to
Yeah.
be the best version of themselves that they can be, they can be, that they're capable.
I think you have to tie it to the authentic you, and the person that God has created you to be,
Mhm.
that sense of genuineness. And I think when other people see the integrity of that over time, that you're consistently making those choices, they start to not only believe you, but they start to trust you because they know that you're not making decisions reactively. You're making decisions
Mhm.
responsibly and in their best interest and in the interest of the organization or the church or the mission, whatever it is that larger that whatever that larger thing
Mhm.
really is. All right. So we've talked about perspectives, right? We've talked about
Mhm.
insights. Let's talk about tools.
Got
And so, what is one or two tools? What are one or two tools? I can sometimes speak English, not very well.
it.
Um, that 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 you have found to be particularly helpful for you as a leader? Just some, is it a personality assessment? Is it an approach, a stop, drop, and roll when the house is on fire?
Right.
Is it, a particular way of speaking? Is it, what is it? Is it a technological app? Like, what is it that you think is just really helpful and practical?
Well,
Document
oh
everything,
my
great
gosh.
HR practices. Like, what is it?
Well, so yeah, the document everything, that is very useful as well. If you're a journaler, if you're not a journaler, actually, I would recommend start journaling, and that can mean voice
I'm
memos.
not a
You're
journaler.
not, well, it's okay. Not everyone likes to write stuff down, but
Yeah,
if you, I mean, everyone on our smartphones, we have a little memo recording app,
sure.
right?
Yeah,
When you are debriefing with yourself, we all have those conversations with ourselves in the car, right? Record them for
that's good.
yourself.
That's really good.
That's a helpful tool because you'll actually start to hear how you communicate and what you're really feeling. I love one. So I know that he's a relatively polarizing figure in our culture today, but there's a lot of things I actually really admire about Jordan Peterson and how he approaches conflict and communication.
Yeah,
He
and
takes a long time to get to what he's trying to
well,
say.
he's been in the eye of the storm for the last
Oh my
several
goodness,
years. So you
yeah,
talk about a guy who has to.
yeah.
I don't think he loves conflict, but I think,
No, he's actually a very agreeable person, but
but
he
what is
faces it heads on.
he manages conflict
Yeah.
because conflict seems to find him pretty
So
regularly.
so
He
what
doesn't mind being disagreeable, though.
No, well, he doesn't mind being disagreeable, but there's a difference between facing that head on and being naturally disagreeable. And
Yeah, I
he
agree.
builds that out in his personality models and that sort
Totally
of thing.
get it.
But one of the things I found really helpful personally, watch how he engages conflict. Watch like interviews where he's talking with reporters who vehemently disagree with him, and just take note of his posturing and his responses. He's very quick to get to the core of the matter, the insightful piece, the trajectory that is often missed in the emotion. I found that to be a very useful tool personally in my development. And also, I
By the way, I would just say as well, he's not dismissive.
know,
It's, when you see some of those interviews, and I've seen quite a few, um, he's actually listening
yeah,
thoughtfully and he's taking what the other person is saying seriously.
mhm,
What's interesting is sometimes they don't do the same for him.
yeah,
They
very
don't
often,
they don't actually really listen to what he's saying, and try to take it
yeah,
seriously and try to answer it seriously. Instead, they become reactive, they become dismissive, they some curse, some become immediately derogatory.
exactly.
And but it is pretty remarkable how he consistently says, "No, I'm going to choose to
Yeah,
approach it this way."
it's a great masterclass of anything, and just what active listening in a contentious culture can look like.
Right.
From a secular perspective, at the very least, we certainly can benefit from more examples in a Christian sphere, I think. But that is something that comes to mind.
Well, Joe Rogan is someone else who manages to disagree pretty well.
Right.
with his guests. And, there's a few others that I think handle disagreement pretty well. And so I think it's something I agree. I think that's a great, by the way, what a great practical tool.
Mhm.
Use your memo to hear yourself, kind
Yeah.
of talk through it. That way you don't bore somebody else
Right. Well, it's
with
not
it.
just about boring someone else. We are not. This is one thing that I think Peterson said. Um, we don't know the degree to which our own words influence us.
Mm.
We don't know how we come across until we actually have to listen to ourselves. I mean, really listen. Not I was in the moment talking and monologuing. We're actually not listening what we're saying in those moments. We're thinking about what we're going to say to ourselves, which is kind of a funny dynamic. Um, if you ever have the chance to listen to how you communicate personally, for example, for myself, I know that I'm prone to rambling as I try to find the right words. It's something that I've had since I was a kid. I'm very,
Oh, you talk through it.
I
I
talk
do the
through it,
same thing. You come
but
by it honestly, for what
but
it's worth.
we've also talked about too. Like it was worse when I was younger because I felt this need to find the right word. It
Right.
wasn't just okay, say what you mean. Take a while to get there. I had to be very precise in my speech.
Because words matter.
Words do
Right.
matter, right? And it's a double edged sword to that when you're trying to process and you're young and you don't really know you don't really
Right.
know much about anything. But you learn a lot by listening to yourself, and you actually, I think, often find the right words later in the moment through self auditing. So I recommend that as a good tool. Watch people actively listen. Watch how that posturing and that watch how they navigate conflict in that.
It's interesting you talk about communication. Warren Buffett was asked, what's the best thing that you could possibly do? He said, go take a public speaking course.
Mm,
So communication is a major skill,
yeah,
and it is something that can be developed.
yeah,
Um, Ronald Reagan was known as the great communicator. What people don't realize was he toured the country learning how to communicate.
yeah,
He spoke in speech after speech after speech. It's not that he was an actor and
right.
so he came by it well. Acting is a whole different skill. He had to learn how to craft speeches and how to communicate those
Mhm.
well. Uh,
Brilliant movie to that effect, as well as The King's Speech with Colin Firth and
Very good.
Jeffrey Rush. That should be mandatory viewing for anyone looking to do public speaking.
I think in leadership training, learning how to deal with calm, contextual communication is key.
Yeah.
Oh, I alliterated there. Calm, contextual
Hey,
communication is
your
key.
pastoral training is
Yeah.
coming up there.
But calm communication to not fly off the handle and walk away. Um, Contextual communication to read the context.
Right.
Now, high level leaders know how to bend context a little bit,
Hmm.
but they certainly all know how to read context. And to expect of themselves what they expect of others, which it would surprise you the number of high level leaders that actually don't. They have expectations of others they
Right.
actually don't hold their own feet to the fire on. I think calm contextual communication in that to know the context you're in and what it requires. Um, it doesn't help. Here's another hypothetical. So your kid runs into oncoming traffic.
Hmm.
In that moment, it doesn't help your child to be hysterical.
Right.
You do, however, have to be forceful.
Right.
And that's not a moment for tell me what you think about standing in the middle of the road.
Right.
The context informs the type of leadership communication style you're going to grab from.
Right.
Now, at the same time, if you speak that forcefully around a board meeting where you're trying to work out a complex problem,
Right.
an M&A, or let's say you're in a church meeting, you're trying to make a major decision that you know is going to potentially impact people who may actually leave the church as a result. That's not a great moment to speak in the same
Right.
way as if your kid is standing in the road with oncoming
Well,
traffic.
knowing your audience is important there as well.
You have well, but it's not just the audience. You have to know the situation.
Yeah.
You have to know the context. Great leaders match their leadership skills to the context. So I would say if there is a skill set or a tool that you could grab onto is learn how the art of communicating in a nuanced way in different
Yeah.
situations and doing that in a calm way, but in a contextualized way. Uh, I deal with intercultural communication skills. So, for instance, it does you no good to speak rudely
Hmm.
or directly in a place that doesn't value rudeness or too much directness, because that would be considered rude, especially if the same message is going to
Yeah.
be coming across in a different way. At the same time, if you're someone who prefers direct communication, I'm one of those people, prefers kind of hearing it plainly, and someone is speaking indirectly,
Hmm.
it's going to help you to actually hear what they're saying
Yeah.
and then try to reflect that back in
Yeah.
a way that they acknowledge.
That's a great term to key in on as well as far as tools go. Reflection, practice reflection in your
Mm.
speech. I think in terms of cinema, and you know this, I have a deep love of cinema going back to when I was a kid. And as you're describing this, I thought of the movie Lincoln. Remember that with Steven
Yeah,
Spielberg,
yeah,
Daniel
yeah.
Day-Lewis? Go back and watch that. Watch how he interacts with people, how he's portrayed at least, which I think was, from what we understand, fairly true to the man who actually was president. He always often to the frustration of like his cabinet members who were from northern states, he would relate in stories.
Right.
That's how he would navigate conflict. He would tell these stories, and it would diffuse the situation, but it would also impart crucial truths and objectives to what needed to have happened to pass, say, the 16th Amendment.
Well, that was a communication tool
Yeah,
that he grabbed from his communication tool grab bag.
exactly. As a lawyer in
Right.
Kentucky, indirect communication,
But you can't do that with everything.
not with everything, but
Sometimes you had to fire a general and then replace him with another
it
general.
happens. Yeah,
But I agree. I think reflection in particular, to really zone down, that you're not just, to use kind of not just the memo, but if in your communication skill set you can reflect what you think you're hearing,
mm-hmm.
and where you're not sure, it keeps you from assuming
Mm-hmm.
too much. And if you assume too much in communication, you actually can get it pretty wrong. And that's happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully, that's not a pattern. I learned from it, but I think it's happened to nearly every leader
Yeah.
where they've had to bump into the assumptive portion of communication. And it's something you're always going to have to guard against. So reflecting back to the person, here's what I think you're saying. Is this what you're saying? Let me rephrase that. Does that sound about right? That helps you clarify, helps them clarify what they're saying and what you're actually addressing when you get into whatever topic you're in. All right. So leadership, right? We talked about perspective, insights, and tools. Thanks, David. I appreciate your leadership. I love the way that you lead others. It's exciting to see you grow as a leader and develop. And um, man, what a privilege to get a chance to work together. And thank you for all of this
Privilege is
setup
all mine, man. I
and
love it.
all of this
It's
stuff.
great.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.